So this is the build I've been testing this weekend. It should overall be better for 100 keys and more fluent. You don't have to play like a ninja that gets one-shot by some little assholes 50 miles away out of the screen. Now we have Dark Shroud and Misery, and therefore a completely new Paragon board. What have I done? As you can see on the helmet, I have Enshrouding for extra % on damage reduction. Standing still for stacks almost doesn't matter. And my chest is still the same. Go for damage reduction and armor. The gloves are now Shared Misery for open room combat. I also started to use the exploit glyph just because of this aspect. The pants are Umbros to stay at 5 shrouds all the time. It is very important. The boots Penitent could be replaced though in this build. They are not necessary anymore. And the weapons are now very interesting because you don't need critical strike damage. It is pretty much as for the poison setup. I think the new best stats are all stats, vulnerable damage, dexterity, and either damage over time or core skill damage. So the dagger. If Blizzard won't nerf poison, I will play 2 daggers because swords offer you critical strike damage, which is, as you now know, not needed for the poison build because it doesn't scale with critical strike damage. I'm still using Corruption for imbuement skill potency. The other one hand is still Blade Dancer. It is the bread and butter for this build. Amulet is also still the same. Some people might ask why I go over the cap, which is, if I remember correctly, 13,500 armor. It is because once I set up the place for combat, I survive anyway and only struggle engaging enemies. My ring is now Infiltrator instead of Retribution. Best stats should be vulnerable damage, critical strike chance, max life, and then either close damage or lucky hit, or damage over time. The second ring is still Bursting Venom. Venoms speaks for itself, most important aspect in our build. The skill tree didn't change much. You still have Puncture, Daze on Twisting Blades. Then I have Shadow Step, which you can replace with something you prefer. For example, people like to play with Smoke Grenade. Maybe you can even try Shadow Imbuement, maybe Cold Imbuement, maybe even Rain of Arrows or Shadow Clone. It is up to you, but I prefer to play with Shadow Step to break CCs or even engage elites, single elites with a stun. Sometimes I even run dash, except for the really hard dungeons. So then we still have Concealment, that's nothing new. Lots of lucky hit, movement speed. You can even replace the movement speed, but I prefer to be very fast during my Concealment and set up traps properly. And at the end I have momentum instead of exposure for even more damage reduction. The Paragon board is completely different compared to the old one. We don't need all the crazy damage glyphs anymore. Instead we go for armor and utility overall. You can see I go for efficacy for extra 25% damage, dexterity and 250 armor. And on top of that we get 20% potency for poison imbue. The second board is still my Tricks of the Trade board. And I go for another Notes boost glyph, Devious. It activates with dexterity, which is perfect. We get elite damage, armor and the multiplier. My third board is Eldritch Bounty. So here you just want to activate Exploit. You need Exploit glyph for Shared Misery aspect on our gloves. And you could even try to, if you want to experiment a bit, go for the legendary note, Eldritch Bounty, which is also pretty nice. But I still prefer Tricks of the Trade. My fourth board is Exploit Weakness. You want a Socket Tracker for 33% longer poison ticks. Pick up the vulnerable damage and even more vulnerable damage. Then we go for the fifth board, which is Cunning Stratagem. Grab the Finisher rare note, boost your magic notes with versatility to get 31% core skill damage and 225 armor. And go ahead for the sixth board, which is Cheap Shot, which doesn't really matter anymore. Go crazy on dexterity and Socket Closer. And at the end we have our seventh board, No Witnesses, which also doesn't matter, just grab Knowledge and Socket Candy to increase your poison damage even more.